I never expected that a single phone call from my son would force me to confront truths I had avoided for years. But that Tuesday afternoon, when Marcus called out of nowhere and said, "Mom, Simone's parents want to finally meet you," something in my chest tightened. His tone wasn't warm, it wasn't excited. It was careful. That was my first red flag. For 35 years, my son had seen me as an ordinary woman, an office employee, someone who lived simply and quietly. He never knew I ran operations for an entire corporation. He never guessed I earned more monthly than some executives did yearly. And I never corrected him because humility is a privilege I had earned the hard way. But that day, the hesitance in his voice told me one thing: he was worried about what his in-laws would think of me. "They're hosting dinner at their house," he continued, coughing awkwardly. "They're very organized people. I told them you're, simple." Simple, that damned word again. I swallowed the sting and forced calmness into my voice. "Do they know what I do for a living?" Another long silence. Then he whispered, "I kind of told them you work in a small office. They think you struggle a bit. But that's okay, Mom. I just didn't want them to judge me, to judge him because of me." That was the truth. I hung up the phone after agreeing to attend, but the air in my apartment suddenly felt heavy. My modest furniture, my old curtains, my simple decor, things I loved, now felt like props in someone else's story. And that's when I made my decision. If they wanted to judge a poor woman, I would let them, but on my terms. I purposely chose the oldest dress I owned, faded blue cotton with a frayed hem. I tied my hair in an uneven bun, wore shoes that had survived 12 winters, and packed a small homemade gift, jam I'd made with my own hands. Not bought, not fancy, real. When I stepped outside my apartment, I felt strangely calm. If Marcus wanted them to see a fragile woman, then I would be the most fragile woman they had ever met. But deep inside, I was preparing for war. Not loud, emotional war, quiet, strategic war. The kind only someone who has survived real storms can fight. I arrived at their house precisely at 7 p.m., an expensive home in an expensive neighborhood. Lights warm, garden perfect, a place built for show. What I didn't know was that the real show hadn't even begun. Because the moment I stepped into their home, I realized they had already planned something behind my back, and it was far uglier than judgment. Simone opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ara, you made it. Come in." Her voice was polite, yes, but stiff, rehearsed, like she was trying to make sure every syllable sounded appropriate. Behind her stood her parents, the infamous Mr. and Mrs. Aldridge. I had heard plenty about them. Wealthy, sophisticated, well-traveled, and obsessed with maintaining their image. Simone's mother, Evelyn, eyed me the way one examines a stain on a white dress, head to toe, twice. She forced a smile. "Welcome, Ara. My, you look comfortable." Comfortable, another insult disguised as elegance. I handed Simone the small jar of homemade jam. "I thought I'd bring something I made myself. A little gift." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted as if I just offered her a used sock. "Oh, how quaint." Her husband Harold stepped forward next, giving me a limp handshake, his eyes already drifting to the worn-out shoes I was wearing. "Dinner will be casual," he said, which was funny considering the crystal glasses, gold-patterned plates, and a table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I walked in slowly, deliberately shrinking my presence. Let them underestimate me. It always works in my favor. But I had barely taken my seat in the living room when something caught my eye, a small detail but enough to confirm my suspicion. My old canvas bag, the one I placed on the sideboard, was slightly unzipped. I never leave it unzipped. Evelyn must have noticed my eyes shift toward it because she immediately looked away, pretending to examine a decorative vase. Ah. So they had already searched my bag. Of course they had. People like them love information more than they love kindness. I played dumb. "This house is beautiful," I said softly. Evelyn lit up, finally a topic she liked. "Oh, we built it 5 years ago, imported tiles from Italy, custom woodwork, everything tailored. We believe a home reflects one's background." Background, another sugar-coated weapon. Harold added, "Marcus is settling well into a better lifestyle. I'm sure he appreciates our help." Interesting, not their daughter's happiness. Not building a family, just lifestyle. Simone sat slightly apart from them, chewing her lip, guilt all over her face. She wasn't as cruel as her parents, but she was scared of them, and fear makes people silent. Evelyn spoke again, but her tone changed, colder, strategic. Before dinner, Harold and I wanted to have a conversation about family roles, about expectations. Ah, there it was, the real reason they invited me. Not to welcome me, not to know me, but to define what place a poor mother should take in their perfect little world. I folded my hands calmly. Of course, I said. Let's talk. But they had no idea that every word they were about to say would bury them deeper. Because just 5 minutes into that conversation, Evelyn slipped and revealed a secret she never intended me to hear. Evelyn straightened her posture, smoothing the front of her silk blouse as though preparing for a business negotiation. Harold sat beside her, legs crossed, fingers steepled, wearing the expression of a man about to deliver a lecture he assumed I needed. Simone lowered her head. She already knew this wouldn't go well. Evelyn began. Ara, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but we believe transparency is essential in a blended family, especially when backgrounds differ. There it was again, that word, backgrounds. People like her use it like a blade. I nodded timidly. I understand, please go on. Harold cleared his throat in a dramatic, theatrical way. Marcus is now part of a family that values structure, stability, order, and contribution. Contribution to what? Their ego fund? Evelyn jumped in with a syrupy smile. Simone has grown up with certain standards, you see. Hard work, yes, but also refinement. We don't expect everyone to match those standards, of course, but we do expect effort. Effort. Meaning, don't embarrass us. Harold continued, Marcus told us that you live alone on a very modest income, that you handle small office work. Admirable, really, but we want to ensure he doesn't feel pressured by additional responsibilities. Simone closed her eyes. She knew this was wrong, but she didn't dare interrupt. I kept my face soft, quiet. Responsibilities? I asked gently. Evelyn leaned in. Well, dear, you're older, you don't have a spouse, you have limited savings. Naturally, Marcus may feel burdened in the future. We simply want to avoid that. Ah, there it was, the accusation wrapped in concern. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their daughter inheriting a husband with a dependent mother. I lowered my eyes and whispered, I don't want to burden him. Evelyn smiled triumphantly, believing she had already won. Yes, exactly, so Harold and I thought of something. She inhaled deeply. We can provide you with a small monthly allowance, nothing extravagant, just enough so Marcus doesn't feel obligated. Harold added, in return, we'd appreciate if you gave them space. Less frequent visits, less involvement. You understand? They wanted to pay me to disappear. Typical, I didn't respond, I just stayed quiet, letting them think I was weak enough to consider it. But then Evelyn made her fatal mistake. She turned to her husband and whispered, thinking I wouldn't hear, honestly, once she signs the agreement, we'll make Marcus understand she's better off in assisted housing. It'll be easier for everyone. I didn't flinch, but inside me. A switch flipped. They hadn't just insulted me, they planned to isolate me from my own son. And that's when I decided they were about to learn exactly who I really was. Because 10 minutes later, I discovered something in their house that gave me the perfect weapon, and it was hidden in plain sight. After Evelyn's little whisper, her plan to push me into assisted housing, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Not for them, for me, they still believed they were in control. But people who feel superior always make the same mistake. They assume the quiet person isn't paying attention. Dinner is almost ready, Simone said softly. Let me check the oven. She stood up and hurried toward the kitchen, grateful for the excuse to escape the tension. Harold motioned toward the hallway. Ara, while we wait, feel free to look around. We have some family portraits and awards displayed. Really? He wanted me to walk around the house? Perfect. I needed exactly that. I stood and moved slowly, playing the naive, overwhelmed woman they expected. Evelyn watched me with amusement, whispering something to Harold that made them both smirk. I pretended not to hear. Their hallway was decorated like a resume, certificates, travel photos, framed magazine covers. Everything was curated to scream, we are better than you. But then I noticed something out of place. A drawer slightly open, not by accident. Someone had rushed to close it but hadn't done it properly, and inside I saw it. A stack of unfiled envelopes, official ones, government ones, bank ones. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. One envelope was flipped upside down, showing the contents through the thin paper, notice of property delinquency. Final warning, Another had bold red letters, unpaid business loan, immediate action required. Ah, so the wealthy, stable, flawless parents-in-law were drowning in debt. Interesting, very interesting. I stepped back just as Simone returned from the kitchen. She noticed the open drawer instantly and froze, eyes widening. She knew. Evelyn appeared behind her, tone sharp. Ara, dear, the kitchen is this way. But I had already seen enough. We all returned to the dining room, the table set beautifully. An absurd effort for people who didn't even know the meaning of kindness. As we sat, Evelyn placed a plate in front of me with exaggerated care. We hope you enjoy it, she said sweetly. We don't usually host casual guests, but tonight is special. I smiled politely. Oh, I appreciate the effort. It must be expensive to host like this. Especially nowadays when finances are unpredictable. Evelyn's fork slipped from her fingers. Harold stiffened. Simone's eyes shot toward me. She knew I knew. I kept eating gently, slowly, as if nothing had happened. Evelyn cleared her throat. Well, we manage, we always have. People like us don't really experience financial unpredictability. I lifted my gaze. Are you sure? Their faces changed, not fully, but enough. They realized they were no longer the only ones holding cards. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and leaned back. Actually, I said softly, there's something I'd like to discuss after dinner. Something important. Harold narrowed his eyes. What is it? I smiled faintly. You'll see. Because they had no idea that what I found in that drawer wasn't just information, it was leverage, and I was going to use it. Dinner continued with forced smiles and stiff politeness. The kind of atmosphere where everyone is pretending something isn't wrong, even though the tension is thick enough to slice with a knife. Evelyn kept glancing at me, small, nervous looks she tried to hide behind sips of wine. Harold, meanwhile, barely touched his food. His mind was somewhere else, calculating, assessing, trying to guess how much I knew. Simone was the only one eating normally, or trying to. Mrs. Ara, she whispered softly, is the food okay? I worked on most of it. I gave her a genuine smile. It's delicious, you cook beautifully. She exhaled, relieved. Poor girl, she wasn't like them, she was just molded by them. Evelyn suddenly lifted her glass. Well, she announced, we're happy to finally have a family dinner. A united family is essential. Harold nodded, adding, unity requires understanding. And sometimes adjustments. Ah, the agreement conversation again. Before I could respond, something unexpected happened. A loud vibrating noise interrupted the moment. It came from Harold's phone. He grabbed it quickly, glanced at the screen, and his face drained of color. He stood abruptly. Excuse me, important call. But as he rushed toward the hallway, his voice carried farther than he intended. I didn't need to eavesdrop. He didn't close the door properly. Hello? Yes, I saw the notice. No, I told you we'd make the payment this week. No, don't escalate. Don't put a lien on the property yet. Listen, we are in the middle of a family event. Fine. I'll call back. Evelyn froze. Simone stopped breathing, and I sipped my water calmly. Harold re-entered the dining room trying to look composed, but the damage was done. Everything okay, dear? Evelyn asked through clenched teeth. Harold forced a brittle smile. Just business. Then he looked at me just briefly. He knew I'd heard. He knew I now held something powerful. Evelyn scrambled to regain control. Ara, she began, before we continue, I'd like to clarify something. I tilted my head. Yes, she inhaled deeply. My husband and I, we only suggested the allowance because we care. We don't want Marcus burdened. We want what's best for Simone, that's all. This was her attempt to soften the earlier cruelty. I nodded slowly. I see. I let the silence linger long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said gently, actually, Evelyn, I think you're right. We should talk about everyone's burdens. Evelyn blinked. What do you mean? I smiled with the politeness of a woman who was about to flip the entire table without raising her voice. Well, since we're discussing financial responsibility, perhaps we should all be transparent about what we have, what we don't, what we hide. Harold's face went rigid. Simone looked like she wanted to disappear. Evelyn swallowed hard. I don't understand. Oh, you do, I murmured, and the room went dead silent. Because the next sentence I spoke didn't just shake them, it shattered the illusion they had spent years building. I folded my hands neatly on the table, keeping my voice quiet and controlled, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Quiet truths cut deeper than shouting. Since we're all discussing financial responsibility, I said, I think it's only fair to acknowledge that everyone has their own struggles. Evelyn gave a trembling laugh. Well, dear, I wouldn't say everyone, I interrupted softly. Your property delinquency notice disagrees. The room froze. The clink of Simone's fork hitting her plate echoed like a gunshot. Harold stiffened so hard his chair creaked. Evelyn's smile vanished instantly, her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes flickered to the hallway drawer. They knew exactly what I had seen. Simone whispered, horrified, Mama, you said everything was fine. Evelyn's voice finally returned, but in a hiss. You had no right to look through our private things? I didn't, I answered calmly. But you left the drawer open, and since you searched my bag, I assumed we were all comfortable with transparency. That line hit Harold like a punch. Simone snapped her head toward her mother. You searched her bag, Evelyn stuttered. I was just checking. For what? Simone demanded. To judge her, to embarrass her? Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, finding no defense. I continued gently, I'm not here to shame you. I'm simply pointing out that you're speaking of financial burdens while drowning in them yourselves. Harold slammed his fist on the table. Watch your tone. You don't know our situation? I didn't flinch. I know you're 3 months behind on property taxes. I know you have unpaid business loans flagged for escalation. And I know tonight's dinner, these gold pattern plates, this expensive wine was staged to convince me you're still doing well. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Simone looked like her entire world was collapsing in front of her. Harold leaned forward, voice low and furious. You think you're clever? You think exposing this gives you some advantage? I gave him a slow, steady look. No, it gives me understanding, a different kind of transparency. When you failed to offer, Evelyn finally whispered, breaking apart, Why didn't Marcus tell us? Why didn't anyone warn us you were like this? Like what? I asked softly. Observant, honest, direct, she swallowed. Ruthless, I shook my head. No, Evelyn, I'm just someone who refuses to be manipulated by people who believe they're above others. Simone wiped tears silently. Mrs. Ara, she whispered, please don't humiliate them more. My heart softened slightly toward her. She wasn't cruel, just raised by people who thought cruelty was sophistication. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, I said, but I won't sit quietly while lies and arrogance dictate how I should exist. Harold exhaled sharply. So what now? You want an apology? You want gratitude? I smiled. No. I want honesty, real honesty, for once. Because what Harold confessed next wasn't honesty, it was desperation. And it changed everything. Harold's shoulders slumped, not from humility, but from exhaustion. His pride was cracking, and cracks make people honest in the ugliest ways. He rubbed his forehead and muttered, You want honesty? Fine, you want the truth, here it is. Evelyn's head whipped toward him. Harold, don't, but he was already unraveling. We're drowning, happy, is that what you wanted to hear? Simone gasped. Dad, he didn't look at her. He stared at me as if I had forced his confession out with a knife. The business fell apart last year, he continued. A partner screwed us over. We kept the house to maintain appearances, for Simone's sake, for marriage negotiations, for our reputation. Evelyn closed her eyes, humiliated. And yes, Harold added bitterly, we're behind on taxes, loans, everything. Simone's hand trembled as she reached for her napkin. You both lied to me, Evelyn snapped. We protected you. From what? Simone cried. Reality, Harold banged his palm on the table again. Look around you, Simone. You think marriage is just love and fairy lights? No, it's alliances, it's stability, it's strategy. We needed you to marry someone who wouldn't add to our problems. Ah, there it was, not even subtle anymore. Simone whispered, so that's why you treated Marcus' mother like she was nothing. Evelyn's face crumbled. I spoke softly. You wanted your daughter to marry up, not across, and certainly not down. Harold didn't deny it. He simply exhaled, defeated. We thought Marcus came from a poor background. That you, he gestured toward my worn dress, my old shoes, would eventually need money, support, and we cannot afford another dependent. Simone's jaw dropped. You thought she'd be a burden? Evelyn wiped a tear. Yes, I nodded slowly. Thank you for finally saying it clearly. Harold laughed bitterly. Well, are you satisfied? You exposed us, you dug up our flaws, what now? I leaned forward. I didn't expose anything, Harold. You exposed yourselves, I just stopped pretending I couldn't see it. He fell silent. And yes, I continued, you're drowning, but not because of money. Money problems come and go. Pride problems ruin families. Simone whispered, I had no idea any of this was happening. You weren't supposed to, Evelyn said through clenched teeth. You were supposed to keep your perfect life, your perfect marriage, your perfect image. And I was supposed to disappear, I added quietly. They didn't deny it, not one of them. Evelyn wiped her cheek with shaky fingers. So, what do you want from us now, revenge? I smiled softly. No. Something much simpler. What? Harold snapped. What more could you possibly want? I met his eyes. The truth about why you really searched my bag. Because the reason they searched my bag wasn't judgment, it was panic. And when they admitted it, the whole situation flipped upside down. Harold and Evelyn exchanged a look, the kind of look shared by people who just realized the trap they stepped into. Simone watched them with her breath held. Harold cleared his throat. Ara, that bag search, it wasn't meant to be insulting. Evelyn added quickly, we were concerned. I raised an eyebrow. Concerned about what exactly? Evelyn looked away. Well, when Marcus mentioned your situation, your simple lifestyle, your tiny apartment, your old belongings, we thought. Harold finished the sentence bluntly. We thought you might ask for money. Simone covered her mouth in horror. I kept my tone gentle, almost soft. You searched my bag to make sure I wasn't carrying documents, bills, or requests for help, didn't you? Evelyn looked like someone had punched her. Harold exhaled harshly. Yes, Simone whispered, broken. You thought she came here hoping to drain you. Evelyn whispered, yes. And you wanted to catch it early, I said, so you could, what? Tell Marcus to distance himself? Harold didn't respond, but the silence was enough. Simone shook her head in disbelief. You both disgust me. Evelyn shot up from her chair. We were being cautious. You don't understand pressure, Simone. Reputation matters, stability matters, and when we heard your mother-in-law was poor, I interrupted quietly. You assumed poverty equals danger. Evelyn froze. I stood calmly. You assumed I'd cling to Marcus for survival. You assumed I'd ask for financial help. You assumed I'd become an obligation. Simone looked at me, tears in her eyes. But you never asked for anything? No, I said. I never have and I never will. Harold's voice cracked slightly. Then why do you live like that? If you have nothing, why hide it? Why pretend? I looked at him steadily. Who said I have nothing? That single question made both Evelyn and Harold snap their heads up simultaneously. I didn't raise my voice, I let the words sink in slowly. I live the way I want, simple, peaceful, private, and that fooled you not because you're smart, but because you're predictable. Evelyn looked pale. What do you mean? I stepped closer, not threatening, just firm. You assumed wealth always looks loud, that money wears jewelry, drives fancy cars, and screams for attention. You forgot that the quiet ones, the humble ones, are often the ones who built everything with their own hands. Harold swallowed. Talking like you're not who we think you are. I smiled calmly. Oh, I'm not. Before they could respond, there was a sudden knock on the door, short, urgent, familiar. Simone frowned. That's Marcus, he wasn't supposed to come until later. Evelyn's face drained of color. Why is he here now? I took a slow breath. Because I asked him to. Harold straightened, tense. Why? I looked toward the hallway as footsteps approached. To hear the truth with his own ears. Because when Marcus walked into that dining room, I revealed a truth that shattered both families at once. Marcus stepped into the dining room with confusion written all over his face. He glanced at Simone, then at her parents, and finally at me. Mom, what's going on? Why did you call me here? You sounded serious. Evelyn tried to recover her composure. Marcus, darling, we were just having a discussion. I held up a hand. Marcus, sit. He sat immediately. He knew the tone, he'd heard it only once before when his father passed. A tone I never used unless something was deeply wrong. Simone whispered, Marcus, there's been a lot happening tonight. Harold crossed his arms, chest puffed like a man preparing for battle. This is a private family matter, it didn't concern you yet. I turned to Marcus. They searched my bag before dinner. His head snapped toward Evelyn. You what? Evelyn stuttered. We only did it because you thought she came here to beg. Marcus shot back. Silence. Even the walls felt ashamed. I continued calmly. They assumed I'm financially desperate. They assumed I'd cling to you. They assumed I'd be a burden on your marriage. Marcus clenched his jaw, fury rising. That is none of your business. Harold muttered. It becomes our business when Simone's future is involved. Simone shook her head. My future, you lied about everything, you hid your debts. You almost pushed Marcus' mother into a corner just to protect your image. Marcus stared at Simone's parents like he was seeing them for the first time. You judged her, he said quietly, without knowing anything, not her character. Not her past, not her sacrifices. I touched his arm gently. Marcus, let me speak. He nodded. I turned back to the Aldridges. You thought I came here empty-handed. But actually, I reached into my worn canvas bag, the same one they had rummaged through, and pulled out a thin file. Evelyn's eyes widened immediately. What is that? Harold tensed. Some dramatic trick? No. I placed the file gently on the table. This is the paperwork I received this morning. I was going to share it with Marcus privately, but considering the situation, I slid it toward my son, who opened it with shaky hands. His eyes widened. Mom, what is this? I smiled softly. Proof that I am not and have never been your burden. Harold grabbed the papers. The color drained from his face. This is a transfer of ownership, a full title. This is a property deed. Evelyn snatched a page. This address, this area, good God, this property alone is worth, I finished her sentence. More than everything you two have left combined. Dead silence. Simone covered her mouth. Marcus whispered, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I wanted you to build your own life, I said. Not depend on mine, not shape yours around mine. Harold's voice cracked. So you're wealthy, I tilted my head. Wealthy enough that your judgment wasn't just cruel, it was laughable. Because the next thing Evelyn did shocked the entire room, and it wasn't an apology. For a full 5 seconds, no one breathed. Evelyn's fingers trembled around the property deed, her eyes darting across the numbers as if they were written in a foreign language. Then she did something none of us expected. She stood, not to apologize, not to correct herself, not to accept the truth, but to deny it. This must be fake, she snapped. Some trick to humiliate us. You expect me to believe a woman who dresses like that owns a property worth millions? I didn't react. I expected this. People like her collapse under truth, they don't absorb it. Harold grabbed the papers from her hands. This is real, Evelyn. I know these seals, these signatures, this is an actual transfer. Evelyn's jaw clenched hard, like she was physically trying to stop her pride from cracking. No, I won't believe it. She staged this. She wants to embarrass us. Marcus stood abruptly, anger shaking in his voice. She doesn't need to embarrass you, you're doing it yourself. Simone looked devastated. Mom, Dad, please stop. This is enough. But Evelyn was spiraling. She pointed at me, her voice trembling between fury and panic. You lived like a poor woman on purpose. That's manipulative. That's deceptive. Why hide money? Why dress like that? Why pretend? I lifted my gaze. I didn't pretend. I lived quietly. It's you who assumed that quiet equals weakness. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Harold rubbed his temples. So everything we said, every assumption we made, every insult? Yes, I finished. Was based on your own insecurities, not mine. Marcus looked heartbroken. Mom, I am so sorry. I placed a hand on his cheek. You have nothing to apologize for. You never judged me, not once. Simone turned to me, tears streaming. Mrs. Ara, I'm ashamed of them. I'm ashamed of myself. I should have stopped them. I gave her a small, gentle smile. You grew up in their world. You're learning your way out of it. That takes courage. Evelyn sank back into her chair, defeated but still stubborn. So what now? She muttered. You think you're better than us because you have money? I shook my head slowly. No, I'm better than you because I don't use money to measure worth. That landed harder than anything else. Harold looked at me, voice softer now, broken even. So what do you intend to do with all this? With us? I stood up. That depends on you. Simone clutched Marcus' hand, terrified of what I'd say next. I glanced at them all one by one, and then I spoke the one sentence that changed the room's air entirely. I haven't told you the second thing inside that file yet. Evelyn's eyes widened. There's more, I nodded. Oh yes, something far more important than the property deed. Because the second document wasn't about money at all, it was about power. And it turned the entire dinner in a direction none of them were prepared for. Evelyn's hand froze halfway to her glass. The word power had stripped every ounce of color from her face. What do you mean? She stammered. I placed the folder back on the table, still sealed, still perfectly calm. This second file, I said, isn't about property or inheritance. It's about control and who's had it all along. Marcus looked confused. Mom, what are you talking about? I opened the folder. Inside lay a single page, official letterhead, signed, stamped, and unmistakable. It was the board of directors' approval naming me the new majority shareholder of the company Harold had once bragged about running. For a full 3 seconds, no one understood what they were seeing. Then Harold did. His eyes darted over the corporate seal, his mouth fell open. This can't be right, he whispered. This is my company. Not anymore, I replied evenly. You sold 28% last quarter to an anonymous investment group. That group was mine. The silence after that sentence was surgical. You could almost hear pride blade out of the room. Evelyn looked from me to her husband, disbelief and panic fighting in her eyes. You mean she owns us? I tilted my head. No. I just own the part you built from arrogance. Marcus blinked hard. Mom, why buy into his company? Because arrogance unmonitored becomes dangerous, I said. And I don't like dangerous people near my family. Simone covered her mouth. So this dinner wasn't about revenge, I finished for her. It was about exposure. And ensuring that next time you decide to humiliate someone, you remember they might sign your paycheck. Harold sank into his chair, defeated. All the superiority that once shaped his posture was gone. He looked small, hollow. Evelyn tried one last strike. You think this makes you powerful? I leaned forward. No, it just proves what real power is, the kind that doesn't need applause, jewelry, or validation. The kind that walks into a room quietly and leaves it shaking. Simone whispered, What happens now? That depends, I said, locking eyes with Evelyn. Some people rebuild after pride collapses. Others stay buried under it. Evelyn looked away. Harold had nothing left to say. Even Marcus and Simone sat frozen, still processing the shift in gravity. I gathered both documents, slipped them back into my bag, and stood. Dinner's over, but the story isn't. Evelyn's voice cracked. What do you mean? I paused at the door. Because the company's first board meeting under new leadership starts tomorrow morning. And both of you are on the agenda. Tomorrow's boardroom won't be a meeting, it'll be Judgment Day. And this time, they won't be dining with forks, but with consequences. The next morning, the city felt colder, like even the wind knew something was coming. The corporate tower gleamed under the gray sky, glass reflecting clouds that looked like steel. Evelyn and Harold arrived first. You could tell by their stiff walk they hadn't slept. The arrogance that used to carry them through these doors was gone, replaced by an anxious rhythm of forced composure. When I entered, every board member rose. Some out of respect, others out of shock. I'd worn the same calm expression as last night, only now it wasn't an act. Good morning, I said. Harold stood quickly, voice sharp but trembling. There must be some misunderstanding. You can't just walk in here and what? I interrupted softly. And take what I legally own. Oh, Harold, the paperwork's been done for months. You just never noticed who was signing your checks. A nervous laugh rippled through the room. Evelyn's cheeks flushed deep red. One of the senior directors cleared his throat. Miss Sterling, shall we proceed with the agenda? I nodded. Let's. As we went through the motions, reports, budgets, projections, Evelyn kept whispering to Harold, desperate to find a foothold in a situation already buried under facts. Finally, I slid a document across the table. This is the motion to restructure leadership, I said. Effective immediately. Harold stared at it. You're firing me? I'm offering you the dignity to resign, I corrected. How you exit will determine how people remember you. The silence stretched, heavy and surgical. Evelyn's nails dug into his arm. Don't you dare sign that. He looked at her, then at me. For once, I saw a man not defending his pride, but facing the cost of it. Slowly, he picked up the pen and signed. Applause broke out, not loud, not joyous, but full of quiet relief. Evelyn slammed her palm on the table. This is revenge? I stood. No, this is accountability. You built an empire on intimidation. I built mine on patience, and patience always wins. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. If you can't respect the room, please leave it. Her lips trembled. For the first time, she obeyed. When the meeting adjourned, the directors approached me one by one, some congratulating, others cautious. Harold walked out without looking back. Evelyn followed, her heels striking the marble like tiny screams. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled. This wasn't satisfaction, it was closure. But something in me whispered, this story isn't finished. Because when you strip power from people who built their identity on it, they don't disappear, they plot. And I knew Evelyn wouldn't go quietly because pride never dies easy. It mutates. That night, I didn't celebrate. Victories built on integrity don't come with fireworks, they come with silence. I made tea, sat by my window, and watched the city lights flicker like small confessions in the dark. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably tearing through her house, searching for someone to blame. Harold would be quiet, drowning in the realization that all the years he spent commanding others had ended with one signature. My phone buzzed. An unknown number, Evelyn, the message was short. You think this is over, you'll regret crossing me. I smiled faintly. Threats from people who have lost control are just echoes of the power they once had. The next morning, a story broke online. A leaked email thread, fabricated of course, claiming I'd manipulated company shares through insider trading. Anonymous sources, dramatic headlines, Evelyn's fingerprints all over it. But what she didn't realize was that I'd been prepared for this months ago. Every document, every transaction, every share purchase had been verified through external auditors, ironclad and traceable. By noon, my legal team had already released the proof. By evening, every major publication had retracted the story. And by nightfall, Evelyn's name had quietly appeared on the board's ethics investigation memo. I didn't have to destroy her. She'd done that herself by assuming the world still revolved around her illusions. At sunset, Marcus called, "Mom, it's over. Evelyn's been suspended from every board seat she had. Dad's resigned publicly. Simone's heartbroken. She'll recover," I said softly. "Sometimes the only way to rebuild is after everything collapses." There was a pause. "Do you feel bad for them?" I looked at the skyline, the same view I'd seen for 20 years. "I don't feel bad," I said, "but I do feel human. Watching pride burn is never pleasant, even when it deserves to." Later that night, Simone came by, no makeup, no jewelry, just truth in her eyes. "I've cut ties with them," she said. "They're my parents, but I can't live with what they've become. I want to start over with honesty this time." I nodded. "Then start by forgiving yourself." "You don't owe me redemption, just change," she cried quietly. I hugged her, not as a victor, but as someone who'd been through her own fires before, because power isn't revenge. It's the ability to stay kind after being tested. As she left, I looked out the window one last time. The city seemed different, not brighter, just clearer. Because when lies collapse, you finally see how solid truth really is. But little did I know, Evelyn's fall wasn't her ending. It was her beginning, and she wasn't done with me yet. 3 weeks passed. The city had already moved on. Headlines faded. Stocks stabilized. Harold disappeared into quiet retirement. But silence from Evelyn was never peace, it was plotting. And one morning, the storm finally arrived. My assistant burst into my office. "Ma'am, urgent, someone leaked your home address online." I didn't flinch. "Who?" "They used an anonymous burner, but the trail leads to one of Evelyn's old PR contacts." Classic. When pride dies, it doesn't vanish, it claws its way back, desperate for relevance. By evening, reporters camped outside my apartment. Cameras flashed. They shouted questions about my salary, my lifestyle, my secret empire. Evelyn had turned privacy into ammunition. But here's the thing about lies. They're loud but short-lived. I called a press conference the next morning, no legal statements, no PR spin, just me. I walked up to the podium in that same gray, wrinkled dress I wore the night of the dinner, the one Evelyn once mocked. "Good morning," I said into the microphones. "You've heard many things about me this week, some true, some desperate, all irrelevant." Cameras clicked. I continued. "I've been called manipulative for living simply while earning greatly. But simplicity isn't deceit, it's discipline. Humility isn't a disguise, it's a choice." The room fell silent. Even the most cynical journalist lowered their pen. People often ask why I hid my wealth. The answer is simple. Because I never wanted it to define me, and if that offends those who worship money, then perhaps they should question what truly rules them. By the time I finished, the crowd was still. No chaos, no scandal. Just the echo of truth and Evelyn's plan turning to dust. That night my phone rang, unknown number, I answered anyway. "Congratulations," Evelyn's voice sneered. "You won again." I sighed. "There are no winners here, Evelyn. Just people who learned at different speeds." She laughed bitterly. Don't act superior, you destroyed us. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided reputation mattered more than character. For a second, she didn't speak. Then her voice cracked. Do you ever regret it, any of it? I thought for a moment. Regret, no. Sadness, yes, because people like you remind me that intelligence without empathy is just cruelty dressed in pearls. The line went dead. I stood by my window, the city glowing below like a field of restless stars. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was free, not because I'd defeated Evelyn, but because she no longer had the power to define me. The war was over, but the lesson remained. Power fades, titles expire, wealth shifts, but dignity, that's the one empire no one can take from you. Months passed. The chaos cooled into quiet routine again, the kind of peace that feels earned, not given. Marcus and Simone visited often now. They didn't bring gifts or guilt, just presence, laughter, and stories that smelled like new beginnings. Simone had started volunteering at a women's mentorship program, teaching financial literacy to those who'd been told they weren't smart enough. I didn't have to ask where that inspiration came from. Evelyn and Harold, they vanished from the city's circles. Word spread that they'd moved abroad, somewhere warm, somewhere anonymous. Pride doesn't like witnesses when it heals. Sometimes I thought about calling her. Not to reopen wounds, but to acknowledge them. Then I'd stop myself. Some lessons aren't meant to be revisited, they're meant to echo. One Sunday morning, I walked to my favorite park. The same bench, the same pigeons, the same gentle stillness that had witnessed every storm inside me. A young woman sat beside me, nervously holding her resume. She was dressed modestly, but her eyes were sharp, hopeful. "Excuse me," she said, "you're Miss Sterling, right? I just wanted to say your story inspired me to apply at your firm. I want to be someone who earns power the right way." I smiled, recognizing myself in her courage. "Then start by never confusing silence with weakness," I said, "and never measure worth in money. It's the easiest way to go broke in spirit." She nodded, eyes shining. As she walked away, I looked up at the sunrise stretching across the skyline, soft, golden, infinite. Power ends, pride fades, but integrity, it multiplies. And in that quiet morning light, I realized the truest form of wealth isn't what you build or own, it's who you become when no one's watching. Sparkles the end, sparkles.